Well, hello everyone. My name is Terry. I am one of the dietitians from Patient Education. There's a few of us actually dietitians that you may meet during your time in our program, but I'll be spending the next hour or so with you, just reviewing some healthy eating tips that can help improve your blood sugars. And we're going to talk a lot about carbohydrates today, which is a really important part of meal planning. So welcome to All About Carbs class. We've got a whole class devoted to carbohydrates, so you can tell that it's an important part of management. Um, Before we begin, just a little bit of housekeeping. Um, Make sure you've got your handouts kind of beside you. So you should have been given a package of information with some different diet handouts. It might have been emailed to you, or maybe it was given to you in person. There's a few of those pieces of handouts that we'll refer to in this class, and you'll need them. So make sure you've got them. The other thing you might want to quickly grab is maybe a pad of paper and just a pen or pencil in case you need to jot down any questions or comments as we go. And then you can make sure to discuss them with the dietitian when you see us individually. Otherwise, we tend to forget. So definitely, I'll give you a minute to do that. You can pause the video if you need to, and then we'll get started. So. Okay. So I think a lot of times when people first are diagnosed with diabetes, people are often wondering, what can I eat? You know, what's safe to eat? And sometimes people come thinking that we're going to hand them um, a diabetic diet, right? That there's this big special diet out there that's going to be the key to everything. Um, Really, a healthy diet for diabetes. There isn't a diabetic diet. It's making healthy choices the majority of the time. But even things like sugar can be included in moderation. We'll talk about how to do that strategically. And we'll talk about what a healthy choice would be. There's definitely more attention to portion size. And that's a huge part of meal planning is portion size. And it's looking at trying to have kind of a regular schedule with your meals as well. 3 meals a day, that can make such a difference in blood sugar, and I've certainly seen that for people that I've met with. But if you can try and work in breakfast, lunch, and supper each day, and try and have a bit of a schedule going with your meals, that can make a big difference. Um, the best spacing in between your main meals is about the 4 to 6 hours. So anything too much above that, if you go more than 6 hours without eating a meal, that sometimes people have trouble with low blood sugars, depending on kind of how your diabetes is managed. If you're taking insulin or some of those diabetes medications that work by stimulating the pancreas to release more insulin, then you do have a greater risk of having a blood sugar that's too low, um, which is not a comfortable feeling. The other thing that can happen is that if your meals are too far apart, that you get really hungry, right? If you've ever missed lunch and waited until supper to eat, sometimes people are just ravenous by the time they do sit down to eat. And then it's really hard to keep your portions in that recommended amount. Um, I find sometimes with irregular meals that sometimes people tend to snack a lot more. And usually the things that you're grabbing for are, foods that give you that quick fix, right? Maybe like the chips or a little bit of sweets to get through the day. Um, Much better strategy to really try and work on having those regular balanced meals. So there really isn't a special diabetic diet. It really is a universal healthy lifestyle, and there's going to be greater attention to carb portions. I guess that would be the caveat to that. So you'll hear us talk a bit about balanced eating. And so what a balanced diet could look like, there's different ways to represent that. You'll see this picture that we've got up on the screen in some of the Diabetes Canada resources. I believe there's one in your package called Just the Basics. And it's got a simple version of healthy eating. It shows half of the dinner plate is vegetables, and then the other half is divided between the starch and the protein. So they're equal, about a quarter starch, a quarter protein. So the starch could be potato, rice, or pasta. The protein could be fish, meat, chicken, lentils, that sort of thing. So this is an easy way to think about portions. This is kind of this picture is hard to see exact portions. We've got an overhead view here, but that glass of milk is about 8 ounces or 1 cup. And then if you'd like, you could also have a piece of fruit. So it's just got a mix of different types of foods, which give you different nutritional benefits. But the sort of sugar forming foods are in a moderate portion. That's not going to aggravate blood sugar. Okay. We're going to talk more about healthy choices. There's another class that we'll talk about a little bit more in detail with what kind of the healthy choices would be. The other simple way to think about a proper portion or a healthy portion is that using your hands, right? We don't all walk around with measuring cups and so forth in our pockets or in our purse, but we all have our hands with us, and so you can use your hands to guide your portions. So carbohydrate portion, such as starch, so a portion of starch, like a portion of pasta, right, or potato, could be up to the size of your fist. A portion of fruit, again, could be the size of your fist. Your protein portion could be the size of your palm and as thick as your little finger, right? You can't stack it up really thick, so it's thick as your little finger. Vegetables, right? As much as you can hold in both hands. So this part isn't the potato, it's the green vegetables, the salad, the broccoli, the lettuce, or yellow beans, or it's those non-starchy vegetables. And then fats would be, the tip of your thumb. So fats could be things like margarine, salad dressing, that kind of thing. And it says drink no more than an 8-ounce glass of low-fat milk with your meal. That's an easy way without getting overly complicated. It's an easy way to think about planning your portions. So if I threw out the word carbohydrate to you, typical response might be some of the foods that come to mind would be bread and rice and pasta. So those starchy foods, and those are certainly a major source of carbohydrates in the foods that in our diet, I should say. We also find carbs in other food groups, things like fruit and milk and honey and sugar. So there's lots of different sources of carbs that we need to kind of familiarize ourselves with, because all sources can have an impact on our blood sugar. You can see we've got lots of different options. Lots of different types of foods can affect us. We're throughout the classes too, we're going to try and bring up a few myths or facts that we have people asking us different questions about nutrition, and we'll try to bring some of those up throughout the classes. Our first myth or fact is sugar is found in desserts and candy. So what would you think about that? Is that a myth or is that a fact? It's actually a myth. Many healthy foods contain carbohydrates or natural sugars, and those can affect our blood sugars just like things like dessert and candy. And so my hope is by the time you get to the end of class, you're a bit of an expert yourself on which foods have carbs and which ones don't, and hopefully you won't be surprised at different foods. So let's kind of test our knowledge before we get into the whole carb information. how many carbs can you pick out from this list of foods? So we've got things like a potato at the top right-hand corner. I'm hoping these are clear as far as what they are. We've got a little handful of nuts in the bottom right-hand corner, a little bowl of rice. You know, do you think that would be a carb? And this other little food here at the bottom left beside the Coke is actually a fish. It's a fish fillet. So I'll just give you a second to see how many carbs. Just challenge yourself to see how many you can figure out as being a carb. Did you have enough time? Did you pick out maybe three carbs? More than that? How about more than 9 or 10 carbs? It's actually quite a few. there's actually 11, I think it is. Um, so yeah, definitely those starchy foods like the potato, the crackers, the bread, the pasta, those are a carb. Also starchy vegetables like corn and definitely popcorn, that bowl of popcorn. Um, there might be some foods that surprise you a little bit. That glass of milk or that little carton of milk, that's definitely a carb. It has carbohydrate. So does honey. And that's good to know because sometimes people think that maybe they'd be better off sweetening up their food, maybe putting honey in their tea instead of sugar. But in terms of your blood sugar, they're actually the same. So we do need to watch our portions of honey, just like regular sugar. Um, the glass of juice as well. You know, even unsweetened fruit juice has got quite a bit of carbs in it. Half a cup actually has the same amount of carb as having a whole piece of fruit. So it adds up pretty quickly, quicker than you think. So we're going to walk you through all the different types of foods and talk about how much carbs they have and how much is a healthy recommended amount living with diabetes. So why we're so focused on carbs, we know if we look at the different parts of our diet, if we look at what we call the main macronutrients in our diet, so things like carbohydrate, fat, and protein, that it's those foods with carbohydrate that raise our blood sugar the most. Carbohydrates digest into glucose, which means sugar, and this glucose or sugar raises our blood glucose after we eat. Um, I don't know if anybody does any blood sugar testing already, but some people actually they do. They'll do it. They'll do a test of what their blood sugar is before they eat, and then they'll test it again, maybe 2 hours after. And you often see a rise, and it's expected to see a little bit of a rise, maybe a couple of points. But if you've had a larger carb meal, you'll probably see a much bigger jump after that high carb meal. So knowing about carbs is certainly important. So if we can track how much carb we eat, then we have a better idea. We can estimate how that meal is going to affect our blood sugar after the meal. Without knowing about carbs, you might feel a bit like you're on this roller coaster with this little guy at the bottom. The blood sugar is kind of going up and down, and it feels like you have very little control. The truth is you do have some impact. You do have some input in how that meal can affect your blood sugar. And one piece of the puzzle is knowing about carbs. So we really want to spend a bit of time talking about carbohydrates and how they affect our blood sugar. Before we talk about carbohydrates specific amounts, we want to try and look at choosing healthier carbohydrates the majority of the time. I kind of subscribe to that 80-20 rule, right? Where we're making those healthy choices 80% of the time, still allowing a little bit of flexibility for the occasional treat. But more often, we want to make sure we're choosing foods closer to their natural state. So foods that have been less processed, We'll talk more about that, and there's another class that is called Healthy Lifestyles. We'll talk about that. We want to choose fruit and vegetables more often and not drink the juices. So the fruit and vegetable is going to have more fiber, which is often better for blood sugars than just drinking the juice. Juice has got that fiber extract and it's just the sugars left over and the vitamins, but it's good. That juice is going to have a much better, bigger, sorry, effect on your blood sugar than if you were just to eat the whole fresh fruit or vegetables. So it is recommended to limit juice and try and eat the fruit and the vegetable more often. Definitely trying to work towards more fiber in our diet can make a difference in a lot of ways, but it can have an impact on blood sugar. Higher fiber foods take longer to digest often, and so that's usually better for blood sugar control. Things that are digested a little bit more slowly, you're not going to see quite as quick of a spike after the meal. They also tend to fill us up, so we're not quite so hungry. And there's just a whole host of benefits in terms of fiber that we'll talk about another class. But just in general, those carbs that have got a bit of fiber to them would be preferable most of the time. So thinking about switching from white bread to whole grain bread if you don't currently eat that. Looking for cereals with a bit of fiber to them, maybe switching from regular pasta to something like a whole wheat pasta could make a difference. Maybe working some, we call them legumes, so beans, peas, and lentils into our diet as well. They're very high in fiber, very nutritious. And then I think we're probably all aware, we probably shouldn't be having a lot of fried fatty foods like chips and fries on a regular basis. They can certainly affect blood sugar, so they're not something you want to have on a regular basis. Also sweets, things like pastries and muffins are really things to just enjoy once in a while. So, okay, let's look at another myth or fact. So if I cut out all the carbohydrates in my diet, my blood sugars will be well managed. What do you think about that one? That one's also a myth. It's kind of tempting. We just finished saying how carbohydrates have the biggest impact on blood sugar. They digest into sugar in our blood. The temptation is there, right? That we think maybe we should cut them out, but really that is not the messaging. There's a lot of great nutritional benefits that we do get from foods containing carbohydrates that we don't want to cut out. And we do need a certain amount of carbohydrates for energy, especially to fuel our brain. Our body likes to have some carb. But the messaging that we want to get across is that we want to choose higher fiber carbohydrates, that we want to watch the portion of carbohydrates at our meals and snacks. And really, we want to spread that intake out over the day, right? So we can't save up, and skip meals and then have a great big feast at supper. We want to definitely try and spread that carbohydrate intake over 3 meals of the day. You'll likely find much better blood sugar control with that kind of a strategy. So that is a myth. Okay, so if we do need some carbs, how much do I need? Well, Diabetes Canada summarizes, they collect the research around diabetes and they summarize all the recommendations that we share with you in terms of healthy living with diabetes. And they actually suggest that 45 to 60% of your energy intake or your calories come from carbs. And so I'm not expecting you to calculate out any percentages of things and sit there with a calculator at your meals, but point being that roughly half of our energy, half of our calories actually could be coming from carbohydrates. So the recommendations are certainly not a no carb diet. What's more meaningful for you to focus on though is more the grams of carbohydrate that you eat at each meal or snack. So that's your we call that your carbohydrate budget. That's your carbohydrate healthy portion that is recommended at each meal and snack. So we've got the recommended carbohydrate amounts listed on the screen, and you have it also on that package of information that you were given. And so the handout that you'll want to take a moment and pull out now looks like this. I hope you can see that. It's called Healthy Eating for Diabetes. If you were given a package in person, and to me it looks brown, kind of a tan color. If you were emailed, of course, it would just be white. But Healthy Eating for Diabetes, this is an important tool that we use every day in helping people to plan their meals. It gives you some kind of a nice summary of how much carbohydrates are in the different foods that are commonly eaten. And it has those carbohydrate recommended amounts listed on right on the very top. So you can see for men or women, they give a separate target. So for women, our carbohydrate budget is 45 to 60 grams of carbohydrate per meal. And for men, it's 60 to 75 grams of carbohydrate per meal. So you men always get a little bit more food. You always need a little bit more, just the differences with men and women. But one thing I want to really emphasize with you is that this is the carbohydrate recommendation per meal. So if you would just humor me, take your pen or your pencil or highlighter or whatever you have, and write in that carbohydrate recommended amount. I want you to circle or highlight or underline in that box where it says per meal. Sometimes people take this list home and they think that that recommended carbohydrate budget is for the whole day, and I'm scared of you thinking that. so that is not what we're suggesting. That wouldn't be enough food for you. That's just how much you could have at each meal of the day. It also lists how much carbohydrate is recommended for a snack, and it says 0 to 30 grams of carbohydrate. And that's because not everybody, zero, because not everybody actually needs snacks in their day. It's very individual. It really depends on blood sugars and kind of what your goals are, your activity, your schedule. And that's something we'll certainly look forward to talking with you about is maybe whether snacks would be a good strategy. So everybody will have the opportunity to meet with a dietitian individually, and we can talk with you about that, whether you need a snack or not. The upper amount of carbs for a snack, so the limit would be 30 grams of carb. That would be, I would say, a larger size snack. If you're just wanting to incorporate a smaller snack, it might be closer to 15 grams of carb. Usually that's enough if it's just a small snack that you're looking for. So yeah, so like I mentioned, we'll certainly walk through that with you when we see you one-on-one. All right. Okay, so let's spend a little bit of time with this carbohydrate handout, and hopefully, you know, after this class or maybe on another day, depending on what your schedule looks like, you can spend a bit of time and really familiarize yourself with the foods that you eat and what food group they might fall into. And that'll save you a whole lot of time when you're carb counting. If you can kind of think, okay, what food does this fit into? Then right away you'll know if that's a carb or not. Okay? After a while, trust me, this will be second nature to you. So the very first carbohydrate food group is called grains and starches. That's the very top food group that I've got on my sheet. I should mention all the carbohydrate food groups are all listed on the very front of this page. So that makes it kind of easy, right? You know that these first four food groups have got the most carb in them. These are the ones that we're really paying special attention to the portion of. And so right above that grains and starches food group, it says each serving below has 15 grams of carbohydrate. So I could pick one serving from this group, and they'd all count as about 15 grams of carbohydrate. So for example, the list says one slice of whole grain bread or bannock, half a bun or half an English muffin, 7 soda crackers. Or if I skip over to the second column on my handout, it says half a cup of potatoes, half a cup of corn, pasta or quinoa, a third of a cup of rice, and I would add that's cooked rice, not raw, so that would be cooked. Any of those food servings, I would count them all as, you can think of them as carb choices. Each choice has about 15 grams of carbohydrate. So this isn't the recommended serving size that you're supposed to eat at a meal. You could certainly have a whole bun, or you could certainly have more than a third of a cup of cooked rice at your meal. But they're just showing that one serving would be counted as 15 grams of carbohydrate. So for example, if I had 2 slices of bread, well, I had a sandwich for lunch, for example. One slice of bread is 15, so I'd count the sandwich as having 30 grams of carbohydrate. And then I could fit that definitely into my 45 to 60 grams of carbohydrate for the meal. If you're having a hamburger, for example, you could eat the whole bun with the hamburger. So when it says half a bun, that just means half a bun counts as 15 grams of carb, so the whole bun would be counted as 30. There are things that, would be good to measure out a couple of times just to train your eye, because they have done studies on people to see kind of what is their accuracy when they eyeball what a portion is versus what it actually is when they measure it out. And guess what? All of us are brutal at it. It's really easy to underestimate our portions. So, for things like potato, pasta, rice, get out the measuring cup. Just see, when I have my scoop of rice for supper, how big is that portion? A third of a cup of rice is 15 grams of carb. So if I had 1 cup, for example, that would be the same as 3 servings. I would count a cup of rice then as being 45 grams of carb. Well, if that's my carbohydrate budget as a woman, 45 to 60 grams for the whole meal is what I'm allowed. So I'm kind of at the lower end of my carb range, my carb budget, with my 1 cup of rice. Imagine if I had, a cup and a half or 2 cups, it adds up quite quickly. So all of those foods that, people often enjoy with meals, things like bread and rice and pasta and fruit, those are all allowed in the diet for diabetes. It's all about just trying to keep those portions in that smaller range. So that's kind of the messaging to get across. We do want to look at trying to choose healthier types of grains and starches, which again means trying to work in higher fiber options. Okay, so maybe switching from like a white bread to a brown bread, or some kind of whole grain bread, switching over from white pasta to whole wheat pasta, for example. So looking for options with more fiber. But again, it's that portion size when we're carb counting that also makes a really big difference. So you'll notice that we've put corn and potatoes in the same food group, in this grains and starches group as well. We sometimes think about corn as being a vegetable, but because it's so starchy, it fits into this grains and starches food group. So we do want to be aware of what the portion would be. So our list says half a cup of corn would be 15 grams of carbohydrate. If you like corn on the cob, you could consider maybe half a cob to be 15 grams of carbohydrate. There's a food group called fruits, and this is our next carbohydrate food group, and it works just the same. So I could pick one serving from the fruits food group, and I would count them all as 15 grams of carbohydrate. Um, Sometimes people, I think they think we're going to give them a big long list of fruits that are allowed to be eaten and fruits that are not allowed. And that's not the case. You can enjoy any of the fruits that you enjoyed previously. It's all about the portions. So those portions are going to be different depending on what fruit you're choosing. And that's where you can refer to this list to give you a basic idea of how much carbs are in them. So you could have, an apple, a medium apple, orange, or pear, and you would count each serving as 15 grams of carb. A small banana is 15 grams. Now, a small banana is those mini-sized bananas. And a lot of those bananas in the store are a lot bigger. So a lot of times I might count maybe a banana, half a banana. If it's a medium or larger size banana, I might count half as being 15 grams of carbohydrate. We could have 15 grapes or 15 cherries, 4 fresh apricots. So they're all about 15 grams of carbohydrate. Okay. So it's just kind of getting to know what a carb serving looks like. And I already mentioned that we want to really be focusing on the fruit itself rather than the juice. So on your list, you'll notice half a cup of fruit juice has got 15 grams of carbohydrate, and this is the unsweetened kind. So much better to have the actual fruit. The next food group that contains carbohydrate is called the milk and alternatives food group. And so this food group just lists milk and yogurt actually as a carb. Other milk type products that we often think about as being a milk alternative, they're actually, for diabetes meal planning, they're put in with another food group called meat and alternatives. They're much lower in carb. They're mostly protein and fat. So as far as the carbohydrate food groups goes, 1 cup of milk, and this is cow's milk or unsweetened soy milk, would have about 15 grams of carbohydrate. If you use other types of milk, you'll definitely want to check, maybe you have almond milk, for example, definitely check that label for carbohydrates, because there definitely can be some differences. Yogurt, there's definitely a difference in carbs with yogurts. 2 things I would suggest with yogurt is number 1, to check the carbs on the label. So a reasonable yogurt choice would be about 15 grams of carbohydrate per serving. And we'll show you how to read a label for carbs in just a little bit, but about 15 grams of carb in a serving. And I also consider, I look for a lower milk fat yogurt. So just like you can buy skim milk or 1% milk or 2% milk, you can also buy 1% milk or 0% milk, milk fat yogurt. Okay, so maybe look for a lower percent milk fat yogurt and one with about 15 grams of carb or less. And there's lots of different brands and things that would fulfill that. The other thing you might notice in the yogurt aisle is there's Greek yogurt, or there's just regular kind of old-fashioned yogurt, and both can fit into a healthy diet with diabetes. And so again, the Greek yogurt's nice because it's got more protein in it. And we'll talk a bit about protein in a bit, but that either can certainly suit a healthy diet. One question I do get asked is there a difference in carbs if I'm drinking 1% milk or 2% milk, for example? And really there's not a difference in carbs. The difference comes from the fat content. So you're getting less fat in a skim milk or 1% milk versus whole milk, for example, or 2%. So usually better to go for the lower fat variety. It'll be better for cholesterol and just weight loss and so forth. and the carbs will be just the same. And the last carbohydrate food group is called other choices. And this is where some of those treats in our diet show up, right? So things like popcorn and maybe chips or cookies or muffins, jam, jelly, syrup, pancake syrup, or sugar. These things we definitely need to account for because they can really increase the carb content of our meal or snack if we're not looking at the portions. And so our list works just the same: 3 cups of popcorn, or 3 to 4 plain cookies, or 1 small muffin. They're all counted as 15 grams of carbohydrate. That's just the same as 1 serving from any of the other food groups. So milk and alternatives, 1 cup is 15 grams of carbohydrate. 1 slice of bread from the grains, 15 grams of carb. They're all interchangeable. So knowing that, things like popcorn, good idea to measure out how many cups are actually in your popcorn bowl when you have popcorn. And just, maybe choose a size of the bowl that fits no more than 6 cups. We had suggested at the beginning that the maximum size snack would be about 30 grams of carbs. So that would be about 6 cups of popcorn popped. That would be the maximum size. So if you enjoy popcorn with a movie, get the smallest package that you can, because guess what? Human nature is we finish the package. Things like cookies and muffins, we definitely want to check out that label if it's available. If you're buying them from a fast food restaurant, just even check online. A lot of them will have that information available if you look for it. Sometimes it's in an app, and we'll talk about those in a little bit. Sometimes I just Google, the restaurant name, and then I'll say nutrition information or something like that. Um, and oftentimes you can kind of get to a place where they have the menu item, and then it's got the carbs listed there so that you don't have to guess, right? You can see how much is in a Timbit or how much is in a muffin, or you can that information is out there if we look. There are some products that are a little bit lower in carb in this food group. So we list here, it says 1 tablespoon of jam, jelly, marmalade, honey is again counted as 15 grams of carbohydrate. There are some brands on the grocery shelf that have got less sugar added. And one example of that is a brand called Edie Smith, which has been around for quite some time. They've got some jams and maybe a syrup, that kind of thing, that it might shave off a little bit of carbs if you enjoy a bit of jam on your toast or pancake syrup on your pancakes. So yeah, so that maybe it would have 5 grams instead of 15 grams. There may be a no-name brand at your grocery store as well that might have a third less sugar added or something like that. So next time, if you're a real jam consumer, or you like a little bit of syrup on your pancake, have a look on the shelf and see if maybe there's a lower carb option that might help reduce the amount of carb at your breakfast, for example. So those are kind of the main carbohydrate food groups that we really want to pay extra attention to in terms of our portion when we sit down and eat a meal or snack. There are some food groups on the back of the page, if I flip it over, that are very, they're much lower, very low in carbohydrate. And so there are 3 food groups on my page: vegetables, meat, and alternatives. And you can just refer to your page. And then a food group called fats. So there really isn't a lot of carbs there. So vegetables, once you have time to look at the list, you'll see there's a whole lot of options. These are your non-starchy vegetables, right? These are things like lettuce. On our list, it just says greens, but lettuce, spinach, things like broccoli and cauliflower, tomatoes and peppers. There's a wide variety of vegetables, and they can be fresh, they can be frozen. If they're canned, hopefully they're canned without salt added. But yeah, just try to really add lots of variety, try some new vegetables. Remember that dinner plate at the very beginning showed half of the plate actually had some of these vegetables on them. So really trying to make an effort to try and work more vegetables into your diet could have a good impact on your blood sugar as well. So you can enjoy them freely. Um, our list here has a few exceptions that are bolded that I'll just review. It says only parsnips, peas, and winter squash would provide about 15 grams of carbohydrate when you eat a cup. So definitely enjoy them. If you like a bigger portion of peas or winter squash, then just make sure you count it into your carb budget. So they would be about 15 grams of carb. That second food group on the back of this side of the page is your meat and alternatives. And that includes, we actually usually just call these foods protein foods. And protein is an important part of meal planning for diabetes as well. We all need some protein in our diet. The nice thing with blood sugar, it doesn't break down into sugar in our body. It's not going to have a big effect on blood sugar if we're having smaller portions. And it's an important part of overall health in terms of maintaining our body tissue. Um, you know, it gives us a different mix of nutrients. It can help manage our appetite. If you have a little bit of protein with that meal or snack, it usually fills you up a little bit more. But the big thing is for meal planning for diabetes is that having a little bit of protein with a meal or snack can slow down the rise in your sugar after eating that carbohydrate rich food. So the two of them paired together are a really good combination. So I think I've got some examples listed next. The last little point here, it says a little goes a long way. So a mealtime portion, if we're using meat, for our protein source, you could think about the size of a deck of cards or the size of your palm. We're not talking about large portions of meat as if we're using that as a protein. Too much of anything can contribute to weight, and there can be other implications as well. But foods that contain protein, there's lots of options. It doesn't have to be meat. We could choose to use any kind of meat, and just making sure that it's lean and trying to avoid as much of the processed meat if possible, which I'll save that for next class. I'll talk a little bit more next class. Lean meat and game. We could use beans, peas, and lentils. We could just use a piece of cheese, low-fat cheese or cottage cheese. That often goes nicely with a piece of fruit. Any kind of meat like chicken, poultry, we're taking the skin off. We could use an egg. Could have a hard-boiled egg, for example, a little bit of fish. So, a bit of tuna with your crackers, for example. There are a variety of soy products, maybe a serving of nuts or seeds. And when I say serving, it's not very big. It could be a closed handful, which to me is about a quarter of a cup. So about a quarter of a cup of nuts and seeds could work. It could be a variety of whatever nuts or seeds you enjoy. Make sure they're unsalted. Or you could just add some nut butter. So, spread some peanut butter on that toast in the morning at breakfast. And that would add a little bit of protein, which could help with blood sugars. What about snacks? Definitely the need for snacks is very individual. We'll certainly talk with you about whether snacks might be a good strategy when you see one of the dietitians. Sometimes we use snacks to help avoid dips in blood sugar in between meals or prior to activity. A little bit of a snack before you go for a walk or run or do a lot of extra activity that you're not used to. Sometimes people need a little snack prior to that to keep their blood sugar a little bit more stable and not dropping too low. Sometimes snacks too can also be helpful so that you're not overeating by the time you eat again. So definitely the whole issue with snacks, we'll talk about it with you when we see you one-on-one. Just keep the snacks small. We're not trying to have a great big snack on top of tack it on to a big meal. and just look for snacks that maybe have a bit of fiber, maybe a bit of fiber and protein in them. And we do have a snack list as well to take home, and it should be included with your package of information. And I don't think I mentioned this already. If I did, I apologize. But it's just called Snack Ideas for People with Diabetes, and there's just lots of different options listed. So places to find carb information. There's lots of places. There's, if you prefer just having a printed book, you know, just look for a carb counting book that's got, at its very least, it's got the serving, it's got carb information, how many grams of fiber, and maybe some things like sodium and fat. You know, there's different options out there, I'm sure, at the store. There are also just lots of online options to figure out carbs. And we do have a list that should be with your package of information as well. That lists lots of different links to healthy eating websites and some sites that you can use to actually look up foods for carbs or even calculate out a recipe. And that's really nice to know. Sometimes I've used an app or a website called MyFitnessPal, and there's a section that is Recipe Analyzer, and I can plug in maybe all the ingredients to my homemade apple crisp recipe. So I can enter in the apples, and I can enter in the flour and the oats and all of that. It'll ask me what the serving size is for that recipe, and then it generates a nutrition label for that homemade recipe, and then I'm not guessing. So that's a nice option. You can certainly do it by hand too, but it takes a lot more work. So I do use that MyFitnessPal recipe analyzer now and again if I need to calculate a recipe. There are brochures, and of course food labels is a huge source of carb information. Not sure how many of you are already reading labels, but we'll talk a little bit about label reading next. So if I asked you the question or made the statement, if the sugar on the food label is low, the food won't affect my blood sugar. What would you say to that? Would that be a myth? Would it be a fact? What would you say? Another myth. And the answer to that is what we call the available carbohydrate and not the sugar content that affects your blood sugar. So I'll explain what I mean by that. Here's a pretty typical label. The labels will look a little different over the next year or so, but here's just an example of a label that we have. And actually your carbohydrate handout that we went through has got all the steps listed on the very bottom with how to read a food label. But I thought we could walk through this together. And so the very first step that you're looking for is the serving size. And that's at the very top of the label. And why are we looking at that? Well, we know that all of the nutrition information for the rest of the label, it's all based on that serving size at the very top. So if I eat a double size serving compared to what's on the label, guess what? I'm getting double the carbs with that as well. So definitely want to remember that step. Next, we can focus right on the grams of carbohydrate. And so there's lots on the food labels. We'll talk a little bit more about this other part of the food label on the right-hand side with all the percentages. We'll talk about that in the Healthy Lifestyles class. But for today, what's going to be more helpful in terms of how a food affects your blood sugar is actually looking at the carbohydrates, the gram amount. So here I've got carbohydrate in bold print, and right beside it says 13 grams of carbohydrate. This is the number that I would like you to look at. This number actually includes the sugars, it includes the fiber, and what's missing is actually starch. And so this carbohydrate number, this total carb, that includes everything. And our body doesn't care whether the carbs come from starch or sugar. It cares about the total amount we've eaten. So this number, the carbohydrate number, is most important to look at. I do find sometimes people, when they first come in, are very focused on sugars on the label, which, it makes sense, right? When we're talking about sugars and our blood sugars. But to be more meaningful and to get a better picture of the overall effect of the food, I'd actually suggest not to look at the sugars. Just focus on the carbs. So you take that carbohydrate gram amount, and the very last step is we can subtract the grams of fiber from the grams of carbohydrate. And the reason we do that is we don't digest fiber, actually. So the fiber part doesn't even affect our blood sugar. So for this food, we would count half a cup as having 11 grams of carbohydrate once we've subtracted the fiber. Okay, let's practice a little bit with this. We've just got a few common food labels here. Most of us are probably familiar with Raisin Bran. And so just take a moment and see if you can figure out what is the serving size, and then how much carbohydrate would one serving have. I'll just give you a second. Did you get 38 grams? So we said one serving was a cup, and then we took 44 grams of carb minus 6 grams of fiber to give us 38 grams of carbohydrate. So what do you think about that carb amount? High or low? Well, for as a woman, I think about that carb budget of 45 to 60 grams, and that 38 grams gets awfully close to my carb budget before I've even factored in the carb from the milk or the carb from the toast or anything else I like with my breakfast. And I bet if I measured out how big of a bowl I had of Raisin Bran, it might be a little more than a cup. So to me, I feel like this might be a higher carb cereal, and that I might be better off with maybe a little bit lower carb cereal, or sometimes what I do is mix a sweeter cereal with a cereal that's not as sweet. Maybe just having the plain bran flakes instead of the Raisin Bran, or a mixture of the two would help to cut the carbs a little bit. Okay, here's a cracker label, and it's from Dare, grains first. Again, what is the serving, and how many carbs would you count that as? If you said 10 grams of carb, then you're right on the right track. So 6 crackers had 12 grams of carb minus the 2 grams of fiber, and that's where we got the 10 grams of carbohydrate. So if you remember, we said a snack choice, a smaller size snack might be 15 grams of carbohydrate. So 10 grams of carb, that certainly could fit as a snack choice if you desired. So that's what we're learning how to do, is just look at those foods we eat every day and learn how to count the carbs that are in them. So here we've got an example of somebody that doesn't carb count. So here's a pretty typical breakfast. So they had their bowl of Raisin Bran, and we figured that was about 38 grams in a cup. Then they had a cup of milk, a cup of orange juice. So the cup of milk was only 15 grams of carb, but the cup of orange juice was 30, right? Because we said half a cup on our page, half a cup of juice was 15, so a whole cup would be 30. And then they had their cup of coffee, but they did use an artificial sweetener. And so they felt pretty good thinking, I'm staying away from sugar, I must be good to go. However, unbeknownst to them, they were still above their carb budget. So they had 83 grams of carb, which is above kind of that healthy recommended carb budget for men or women. Good news is there's a few simple changes that they could make that really could make a good difference in their blood sugar. So things like maybe cutting out the juice, at the very least a smaller glass of juice, or maybe having a piece of fruit with their breakfast instead of the juice. Oh, here's another idea. They could change the cereal. Instead of the Raisin Bran, maybe they have Cheerios, and the Cheerios would be 22 grams of carb minus the 3 grams of fiber. So that would give us 19 grams of carb, which now we're into for the whole meal, we're only at 64 grams. So that made a big difference. The other thing with this meal is there's something missing. So what's something that they could add to this breakfast that might make a difference in their blood sugar? Right? We talked about it earlier, protein, right? So they're not having any protein with this breakfast. So maybe they could sprinkle some nuts on their cereal. Maybe they don't mind having a little bit of, a boiled egg on the side. There's different options, a little bowl of cottage cheese or something. Everybody's a little bit different with the strategy they might use, or food they might use for a protein. But there's definitely little changes that could have a big impact on this person's blood sugar. We want to make sure that besides looking at carbs, that the way that we're eating, that we're kind of making that energy last. We're eating in such a way that we're slowing down how quickly that carb is being absorbed. So eating 3 regular meals, breakfast, lunch, and supper is hugely important. Spacing those meals about 4 to 6 hours. Maybe aiming for a little bit of protein with every meal and snack, and keeping snacks on the small side. So maybe having snacks that could have a little bit of carb, like fruit or crackers or toast, but also some protein with them. Protein like nuts or peanut butter or cheese. And again, we have that snack list that you could look at for some new ideas if you're kind of in a rut. Okay, so let's do a little bit of carb counting practice together. I'm gonna just have you pull out, there's a worksheet, and I'm gonna find my worksheet here too. Give me a second. Okay. So there is a worksheet. It's kind of it's a stapled, it's got a few pages to it. It's called Carbohydrate Counting Worksheet Basic. I don't know if you can see that. I hope that's close enough. So just see if you can find that in your package. And it's got a lot of different foods that you can work through and try and calculate out the carbs for. Now, what I thought I could do, there's several pages to this, and just to let you know, the answers are actually, for all of these examples, the answers are actually written on the back. So you've got all these calculations, all the answers there that you can work through at home. But for now, try not to look at those answers. And I thought we could just work through one example from each page, just to kind of show you kind of how this works and do a little bit of practice with carb counting. So let's look at the front of the page of our worksheet, and let's look at the first breakfast. We're calling it basic breakfast number 1. So in this breakfast, it lists things like toast. So it says 2 slices of brown toast, 1 teaspoon of margarine. It's got peanut butter, coffee with sugar, milk, and an orange. So we can use that healthy eating for diabetes carb sheet to try and figure out how much carb is in some of these meals. Okay, So we've got 2 slices of brown toast. So remember we said 1 slice of toast is 15 grams. So we would count 2 slices as 30 grams. So that's how we got 30 there. The next food here, it says 1 teaspoon of margarine. So we kind of have to think, which food group would margarine fit into? And once you have time to kind of familiarize yourself with the list, you'll see that margarine fits into that very last food group called fats. And so you can count margarine as having 0 grams of carb because it's a fat. It's not in those carb food groups. 2 tablespoons of peanut butter. So the peanut butter would fit into that food group called meat and alternatives. So it's one of those protein foods, remember? So that would also have 0 grams of carbohydrate. Coffee isn't on our list. Coffee itself really has no carbohydrate, but the sugar that was added to the coffee did. And so if we look at our list, we see that the sugar fits into that sugars food group, or others, sorry, it's called others. Hopefully you can see that. And so my list says 1 or 3 teaspoons of sugar has 15 grams of carbohydrate. So therefore 1 teaspoon would only have 5 grams of carbohydrate. Okay, so 5 grams of carbohydrate with the coffee and sugar. 1 cup of milk would be 15 grams of carbohydrate. And of course that fits, I got that from the food group called milk and alternatives. And finally, 1 medium orange. An orange fits into the fruit food group, and I would count 1 orange as having 15 grams. So here we have the grand total. We've added it up for you. The grand total would be 65 grams of carb. So that could fit into the carb budget for men or women. If you took the teaspoon of sugar away, maybe just used like an artificial sweetener or no sugar, then you'd be at 60, and you'd be right on track. So, okay, let's turn the page over. Let's do just 2 more examples. All right, so now we've moved on to the next page, and we're looking at the sheet that says carbohydrate counting basic, and it's the breakfast that lists pancakes. So let's look at that breakfast. All right, so pancakes, 2 4-inch pancakes counts as 30 grams of carb. So I don't know if you measure your pancakes, that adds up pretty quick. A little 4-inch pancake is 15, so 2 is 30. And I got that because pancakes fits into the grains and starches food group. Again, a teaspoon of margarine has 0 grams because it's fat, right? 1 small banana from the fruit food group, again, is 15 grams of carbohydrate. 1 tablespoon of syrup would be 15 grams of carbohydrate. If you're looking, our list doesn't specifically list syrup, but it says a tablespoon of jam, jelly, marmalade, honey, and we're adding syrup as a similar type food for 15 grams of carb. And then they topped it off with a cup of apple juice, and that added another 30 grams. So we're left with a grand total of 90 grams of carb. So you can imagine that this meal, this breakfast, that person's blood sugar was probably higher than the breakfast that we had reviewed before. That was only 65 grams. You know, again, just like when we were talking about that earlier example, there's probably some little changes this person could do to kind of bring that carb into a more reasonable level, you know? Again, they could cut the juice. They could use a different kind of syrup, maybe that's got less sugar added. Um, they, they could skip the banana. They could add some protein with an egg, or even spread some peanut butter on their pancake. You know, that would give you a little bit of protein. So there's lots you could do to kind of make that work for your carb budget, and ultimately result in a better blood sugar after the meal. You could make your own pancakes too. I just thought of that. You could make your own pancakes and use a little bit of whole wheat flour, kind of a mixture of white and whole wheat. So it's another thought. Okay. And let's do the one more example. And so I'm going to turn my page, and it's the advanced. Now you guys have the graduated. Now you're experts almost here. So you're in the advanced page. Oh, there we go. And for this last example, if I was doing this at home with you, I would point out that this page requires label reading, and the paper or electronic copy that you would have, if you were to flip the page over, it's got some of the labels for the examples used. Like it's got the Honey Nut Cheerios label on the next page, and it's got a milk label and so forth. So this is where we're trying to kind of simulate real life, and we're bringing in that label reading. So let's look at the Honey Nut Cheerios breakfast example. All right, so we've got a cup and a half of Honey Nut Cheerios, half a cup of milk, an orange, and boiled egg. Okay, so remember those steps when you're reading a food label. This is where it's kind of highlights the importance. So this is teeny tiny on my screen or your screen, but you've got the real label in real life on your page, hopefully. So what the Honey Nut Cheerios label says is, what is the serving size? Well, the serving size for the Honey Nut Cheerios label is only 3/4 of a cup. And what are we eating? We're eating a cup and a half. So that's good to note, because we're actually eating a double portion rather than what's listed on the label. So we tried to be a little bit tricky there. Okay, and so the carbohydrates in a 3/4 cup portion is 22 grams of carbohydrate, and the fiber is 2 grams. And so one serving of Honey Nut Cheerios would be 20 grams of carb, but remember, we're doubling the serving, so we're actually having 40 grams. So we got that information from the food label. So hopefully that makes sense. We need to remember those food label reading steps. All right. We've also got the actual white milk label that we can look at. Now, excuse me, I think your handout shows a label for both white and chocolate milk. So make sure when you're looking at your package that you're looking at the label that's directly beside the white milk picture. So here's the white milk picture. This is the label that goes with the white milk. The one below that is chocolate, so we're using the white. So it says one serving, which is 250 mils, which is a cup, would have 12 grams of carbohydrate. And the other thing too, if you weren't using that actual label, maybe you were just kind of estimating using the carb sheet, it said 1 cup had 15 grams of carb. So there's a couple of grams difference there, which is really nothing. It doesn't result in a big carb difference. So half a cup you might count as 6 grams if you were using the label of carb, or 7.5 grams if you were using the sheet, and both would be correct. So we're just kind of splitting hairs there. And then we would count 1 orange as 15 grams of carb, and a boiled egg as having no carb, because again, where does egg fit? right? It's a protein, or it fits into that meat and alternatives food group. So the grand total that we counted then was 61 or 62 and a half grams of carb. And that would definitely fit into our budget for the meal. So I'd really encourage you to start looking at some of the labels for some of the foods that you eat quite often. Check out that box of cereal, maybe get out a measuring cup and see how your portion differs from the portion on the label. Pull out that box of crackers. Just have a look, start looking at carbs around you, and really keep that carbohydrate budget amount in mind. And it can just make such a big difference in blood sugars. Okay, myth or fact? Here's a bit of a change of direction. People with diabetes cannot eat chocolate, jam, or ice cream. So what do you think about that one? Hopefully you said myth. If your blood sugars are well controlled, um, you can include small portions of carbohydrates on occasion, as long as you plan ahead and kind of work them into your carbohydrate budget. So if it's anniversary or birthday and you're going to have a little piece of cake with the meal, sometimes people will cut back a little bit on something else that's got carb with the meal. So maybe a little bit less potato to accommodate for that carb from the cake. And once in a while, that can fit into your diet just like for anybody. Day to day, don't turn all your carbs into sweets. That's not healthy for anybody. But on special occasions, as long as you're keeping that portion down, and your blood sugars are generally well managed, you should be able to incorporate that on occasion. And it does make the diet more enjoyable and sustainable, right, over the long haul. I always think that sweets or little desserts and things best to include with a meal rather than having it on an empty tummy, like having it as a snack. And I just feel that it would digest a little bit more slowly. And so if you had other food in your stomach, um, and hopefully not have as big of a rise in your blood sugar after. So that's the other thing is maybe have it with the meal, not as a snack in the evening, for example. Portion obviously is important as well. So again, just remember that if you're having a treat, one of those other foods, and include that carb content in your carb budget for the meal. Okay, myth or fact? The next one here. Okay, I can drink as much juice as I like if it says no sugar added. You'll probably notice some of those claims on some of the packages, especially foods that are marketed for people with diabetes. This is a myth. And the message we want to share is that no sugar added, that claim does not mean the juice is sugar free. There are still naturally occurring sugars that were already in the juice. They just haven't added extra to it. So I often just encourage people, don't look at the claims on the package, go right to the heart of the matter and really focus in just on the label with the carbs. That's going to tell you the most information. Because there's lots of words that just are different ways of saying sugar. Things like molasses. Obviously, the word sugar would twig you, but sometimes sugar sources might end in OSE, ose, right? Fructose, glucose, maltose, lactose. There's lots of different words for sugar. And bottom line, right, we said it's the carbohydrates that we really want to focus on. Some of those no sugar added products use what they call a sugar alcohol to sweeten them. And sugar alcohols, there's different types. Usually they end in OL, sorbitol, xylitol, mannitol. And sugar alcohols are neither sugar nor an alcohol. So you can You can find them, they occur in small amounts naturally in different foods, and they can also be added by manufacturers to sweeten products. And they're only partly absorbed, so they really don't have a big impact on blood sugars. And in fact, we can subtract them from the carbs, just like we do fiber. But the thing I wanted to mention to you is that if you have too much of the sugar alcohols, you can have some side effects like gas and bloating and diarrhea. So you want to be a little careful that you're using these in moderation as well. And so in our example, sugar alcohols are listed right below the carbohydrates. So right below fiber and sugar, it says 9 grams of sugar alcohols in one serving. And so the suggestion is that we try and limit our intake to less than 10 grams a day. So you wouldn't want more than one serving of this food product per day. So even if something doesn't affect your blood sugar, you want to use it in moderation too. So, besides sugar alcohols, there are other artificial sweeteners used to sweeten foods, and there's a whole list of them. And the nice thing about artificial sweeteners is that they do not affect blood sugars. They give you that sweet taste when added to food without providing the carbohydrate, right? So you'll look at the label and it might say that it has 0 grams of carbohydrate if it's a pop, for example, that uses one of these artificial sweeteners. So that's the nice part. And so some examples listed are Equal and NutraSweet, Splenda, Sweet Low, and Stevia. These things are to be enjoyed in moderation as well. Sometimes people wonder a little bit about the safety of these sweeteners and wonder whether it's safe to use. And I would just direct you to, there's a handout that is also in your package, and it's from Diabetes Canada. I'm going to try and hold this up so you can see it. I don't know if you can see that. But it's got 2 sides. It's got one side's got sugars and sweeteners. On the other side, it's got sugars or sweeteners that do not affect blood sugar. And so there's a whole bunch of different sweeteners listed. And Health Canada has approved them to be safe as long as you're staying within what they call the acceptable daily intake level. And this level, they shorten it and they call it ADI. And it's all on this handout list, and it shows what the ADI is for every sweetener that's listed. And so everybody's ADI for the different sweeteners is a little bit different because it's based on your body weight. So you kind of have to know what your weight is in kilograms, and then you can use that to calculate the ADI if you're concerned with how much you're taking in. In general, that level is actually quite a bit higher than what most people would eat or drink. But I would say these things, oops, I'll skip back here, that these things should be used in moderation. Just because something doesn't have a lot of carb doesn't make it a more nutritious choice. So much better to drink lots of water and maybe have a glass of milk and not drink diet pop all day, for example. The diet pop, again, it kind of goes back to those foods that are closer to nature. So we're not replacing all of our liquids with diet sweetener, sweetened drinks and so forth. But once in a while, if you feel like a pop, for example, one that uses an artificial sweetener would be a lot better for your blood sugar. So having a diet pop, if you're out in a restaurant, wouldn't raise your blood sugar like having a regular glass of pop would. And really, the use of artificial sweeteners, I would say, is very individual. Some people don't like them, don't like the taste of them, notice a difference, and that's fine. You certainly don't need to use them. They just give you a little bit of flexibility with enjoying, a sweet tasting dessert or treat now and again. The other option is just to eat less of the real thing. Okay, and I think this is our last myth or fact. we've kind of had a whirlwind through all of this information. Myth or fact, if you have diabetes, you can't drink alcohol. That's also a myth. And so the answer to that is alcohol can be included in moderation with a meal or snack, not on an empty stomach. So I wanted to talk about that a little bit more. We don't generally need to avoid alcohol just because you have diabetes, but you do want to make sure that your blood sugars are well managed. If you're really struggling to get that control down where you'd like it to be within target, not the best time to introduce alcohol. But once things are fairly stable, you feel like having an alcoholic drink, again, just moderation definitely applies. And as long as your doctor hasn't advise that you limit alcohol for other health reasons. The one safety tip that's unique to diabetes is that we need to be aware that drinking alcohol on an empty stomach can increase the risk of having a low blood sugar. And that low blood sugar can happen even up to 24 hours later. And this is more of a risk if you're taking insulin or taking some of those diabetes medications that also carry a risk of a low blood sugar. The reason why alcohol can increase your risk of having a low blood sugar if you drink it on an empty stomach is that our livers are not good multitaskers in a way. So the liver normally stores extra sugar for times when you're not eating. It can release a little bit of stored sugar if your sugar starts to drop a little bit low. With alcohol, if you're drinking on an empty stomach, your liver is too busy processing that alcohol to give you that safeguard of extra sugar that it would normally put out for you. And so it is good advice. If you do enjoy alcoholic drinks, make sure to have them with a meal or snack. Don't drink on an empty stomach. That's probably good advice anyway. So the bottom line with alcohol is if you do drink, or if you don't drink, I should say, don't start. If you do, just do so in moderation. Moderation could be, 1 or 2 drinks a day and just not on an empty stomach. People don't always realize that, besides blood sugar, alcohol can affect weight. It can affect even cholesterol. So we want to use definitely moderation with alcohol as well. So when they're talking about 1 or 2 drinks a day, it's kind of that standard size listed here. 12 ounces of beer would be one drink, 5 ounces of wine, 3 ounces of fortified wine, or 1.5 ounces of liquor. And there's a lot, if you want to know more about alcohol, there is also another nice summary from Diabetes Canada. And it kind of walks through all those points. And the nice thing on the sheet is on the very back, it lists all about the different drinks that people have, and it shows how much carbohydrate is in them. So for example, when I look at one 12-ounce beer, it would have 12 grams of carb versus a low carb beer might have 3 grams, or a light beer might have 5 grams of carb. So that definitely could make a difference. It lists a glass of wine as only having maybe 1 to 4 grams of carb, so wine is quite low. However, a wine cooler might have up to 38 grams of carb, which is quite high. You need to be careful with what you mix your alcohol with as well. And there's a whole list. If you're adding juice or adding Clamato to your drinks, that can really add the carbs. So most people would use water or diet pop, for example. So have a look. Lots of good information on here if you have questions about alcohol. As I mentioned earlier, there's lots of great online resources and apps you can refer to. This is just a few examples, but you'll be given a much more detailed list, and it lists kind of more website links to recipes and so forth. For diabetes information, I always like to refer to the Diabetes Canada website, which is diabetes.ca, which is easy to remember because of that. It takes a little bit to navigate around the site, but there's just lots of great information found there once you kind of find your way around. So anyways, so that's kind of what we had wanted to share with you. So what's next? If you haven't seen it already, um, the next diet class offered to people with diabetes in our program is called Healthy Lifestyles. So there'll be another Healthy Lifestyles online class. You should have been registered for it, or if you haven't and you're just interested in it, you can definitely call Patient Education and inquire about it if you'd like to learn more. Our number at Patient Education is 694-0230. And just let us know and we'd be happy to share that class with you. Just like today, make sure you have your handouts all ready to go, like you've got your package of information with you, because we'll refer to some of those as well. Pen and paper, again, is also handy so that you can write down any questions. I think that's all I wanted to mention for you today. So anyways, I just wanted to thank you for watching. I hope you picked out a few new tips today that you hadn't learned before. Thanks for spending the hour or so with me, and I really look forward to meeting you in the future. Okay, thanks again. Bye-bye.